Hey, good afternoon and welcome to today's panel discussion, Cloud-Enabled Data Solutions for Pharma Manufacturing, the Importance of Integrating and Recontextualizing Your Data, hosted by Catalent 4IR Solutions and Grantek. Before we get started, here are just a couple of tips to help you all get the most out of today's discussion. If you have any questions that come up throughout the chat, enter them into the online chat panel in your browser. We'll be collecting them later at the Q&A. All right, so first off, we'll get to introducing our panelists. Then we'll set the stage for today's discussion, talking a little bit about Pharma 4.0 and where manufacturers are investing. And then we'll get into the discussion and afterward answer any questions that you may have. Okay, let's get to it. First up, introductions. My name is Bryon Hayes. I'm the Director of Smart Manufacturing Solutions at Grantek. I've been with the company for 21 years, starting out as a fresh-faced engineer straight out of school. My career has grown with the company and has been primarily focused on the life sciences industry, where I've implemented and managed countless automation and information projects. As the SMS Director, I manage a portfolio of productized solutions that help our customers navigate technology landscape within life sciences. I'm actively engaged in the International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineers, especially in Canada, and I have been involved in the Pharma 4.0 community of practice for about 5 years. James?
Thanks, Bryon. So I'm James Burnand. I'm the CEO of 4IR Solutions. I'm an industry veteran in industrial automation and life sciences, having worked in a variety of different roles at different types of companies. 4IR I've been part of for 2 years, and really our space that we operate in is we have a product called PharmaStack, which is a cloud-based platform as a service that allows manufacturers to be able to operate and integrate their factory floor workloads with cloud and hybrid cloud. So yeah, happy to be a part of the discussion. Thanks.
Cool.
Chris?
Yeah, I'm Chris Demers. I'm the global lead for plant data and analytics at Catalent Pharma Solutions. So I've been at Catalent for about 3 years. Really in this role, I'm focused on a lot of connectivity initiatives at the plant floor data, creating a single source of truth at the plant floor and contextualizing the data at the edge. Prior to Catalent, I was at a competitor, CDMO, who shall not be named. And prior to that, I was in academia before I pivoted into industry.
Okay, so now for our first and only poll question. The question is, have you adopted cloud technologies in your OT manufacturing environment? Are you not considering it at all, or are you piloting or testing a solution? Maybe you're using cloud in a limited capacity, or perhaps you're a cloud-first organization using cloud regularly in your manufacturing toolset. Okay, so go ahead and vote now.
I'm super happy that nobody's clicking on not even considering it. So I would be surprised if you were here in this session if you were answering the first thing. But,
yeah. Yeah, we've got some answers trickling in. Looks like the majority of folks are using cloud in a limited capacity in their OT environment. So,
and I think just before we go into our generalized discussion, I think that's consistent with what we've seen. I mean, you look at the IT space of a lot of organizations have gone cloud first, cloud centric, and so the manufacturing has usually some sort of a lag, especially on the plant floor side of things. So yeah, I think that makes sense from a big picture perspective.
Okay, so now we'll take a quick look at Pharma 4.0, just what it is, how it relates to Industry 4.0, and jump into some more focused discussion around the cloud, and then we'll get into our panel discussion. So first off, it's keen to understand that at Pharma 4.0, it's just not mapping Industry 4.0 technology into the life sciences industry. It goes a lot deeper than that, as we'll demonstrate. So a little history. Members of the ISPE keen to establish a framework for adapting digital strategies to the unique operating environment of pharma manufacturing, formed a special interest group, and in 2017, we released the Pharma 4.0 operating model, which you can see on screen right now. It's divided into 4 discrete areas around resources, organization, processes, culture, and information systems. And you'll notice that only the latter is directly technology focused. The other 3 areas are focused on the manufacturing organization itself, its people, its processes, and its culture. And in addition to the 4 areas at the top and bottom of the model, there are 2 enablers: digital maturity and data integrity by design. And these are key to establishing a sound digital strategy that will work for a pharma company's unique regulatory environment. So if we do want to focus on technology just for a second here, it's clear that cloud solutions are what people look to most when they think about Pharma 4.0. Cloud computing has grown beyond, the typical tech sector and IT worlds in recent years, emerging from the back office, and applications are now spreading into manufacturing. And some traits of cloud computing where industry sees value is in resilience, the speed, and the scalability. So you're not just reducing capex; it's going far beyond that. So. And traditionally, pharma manufacturing has lagged in the adoption of cloud technology, but companies are now seeing the value, and the use of cloud is growing. Just an example, recent company reports and press releases, 16 of the top 20 pharma companies refer specifically to cloud technologies, and the applications they mention span across the value chain. Dominant mentions include early R&D, market access, clinical, tech transfer, and commercial manufacturing. So furthermore, in a quick Google search for Pharma 4.0, almost every article lists cloud technologies as the first or second item in the list of enabling technologies. So it's clear that cloud is the pillar that bolsters digital transformation.
How come you didn't ask ChatGPT?
Oh,
sorry.
No comment. So looking at kind of where is the investment happening specifically in cloud or the applications that cloud enables, most of the top consulting firms reference analytics, AI, and machine learning as the top applications that can benefit from a leap into the cloud. The global tech market advisory firm ABI Research, they forecast that overall digital factory revenue will top with a staggering sum of $4.5 billion US in 2030, with spending by pharma manufacturers on data analytics forecast to grow by 27% compound annual growth rate, and estimated to be worth $1.2 billion in 2030 as manufacturers look to track, optimize their operations, and boost their productivity. AWS is also, one of the big 3 CSPs out there, and itself, they focus on the concept of continuous compliance in the cloud, and they're emphasizing, the ability of the cloud to enable enhanced trackability and traceability. And you see both, many companies are jumping into AWS platform, but Merck and Moderna are referenced in the article that AWS had put out, leveraging. So I'm with Merck, leveraging CloudTrail to log all changes to their systems, and AWS config to show auditors changes in infrastructure, and Moderna implementing GXP workloads using SAP on their AWS cloud. And then you've got validation solutions like Neat and Valgenesis, moving away from paper validation and revolutionizing the way companies are verifying compliance. Okay, so enough from me. Let's get into the panel discussion. So our first topic is validation impacts with cloud-enabled solutions, and I just wanted to start by referencing a topic I saw recently in the ISPE forums called "Let's Validate Like It's 1996," and in there, Andy Robinson of a new startup called GX Paz and Michelle Volo from Tulip and some others were discussing why companies are still validating in a way that contradicts the latest industry guidance. And, things like people interpreting Part 11 in such a way as to neglect the actual predicate rules behind Part 11, ticking boxes to pass ERES checklists, but deploying systems that lack basic features, not focusing on product quality and patient safety, forgetting that process knowledge, risk management, critical thinking should be at the top of the mind. So you guys, what do you think? Is the cloud going to turn this around?
I think the change in the way solutions are delivered and the speed and time to value that can be achieved by taking advantage of the technologies and tools that are available in the cloud means that you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not also looking at the processes you go through to qualify those solutions. And Chris, I mean, you're an end user. You probably have better perspective on this than any. But to me, it seems like if you're going to go and consider these sorts of solutions and not, look at CSA, even at parts of CSA, and looking at a more leveraged framework for validation, I feel like you're missing opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few areas there. I mean, I love the sentiment there about using common sense, because I think that like, honestly, that's like the best, most simple way to put it. Like, how closely is this going to actually impact the product? If we are never in a million years going to, like, obviously these products are destined to be, injected into humans. Like, that is the utmost importance that we have high quality data. That being said, like, I don't think that the 21 CFR Part 11 and other, the validation teams, I personally feel that, they're the first sort of group of teams to throw up roadblocks and the last to help you through them. So, a lot, like you said, a lot of times it's just, checking a box and not really putting a whole lot of thought into the risk assessment, which I feel like is the most critical part of.
Yeah, I think the ISPE has done some really great things, helping to encourage people to understand what does that mean, because it's probably a scary thing for validation departments, especially folks that are maybe less tech savvy, to try to figure out exactly, well, how do I do this? This is different and new, and if I don't do it the way I've done it before, then I'm putting myself or my company or the patient safety at risk. And the ISPE published a document. And I guess it was part of one of their publications called Quality Agreements for SaaS Solutions, and it was in March of 2022. And it really talks about what are the different characteristics and things that you should assess of a vendor when you're going to potentially be using their quality process as part of the evidence for validation that you're going to be producing. And it simplifies it in such a way that to your point, it makes sense, right? You're doing things that make sense, and you're not writing documents just to write documents. Right. You're creating the documents you need to ensure that the quality is where you expect it to be.
And I think that there's a level of trust there between us as an end user and vendors that for some reason, people aren't comfortable with. Like, I love building relationships with vendors, and yeah, you trust that you're upholding the same level of quality that we would, if this were our product, basically. And and the software providers get audited by a million different end users, I'm sure. So it's like incredibly cumbersome to not have a sort of universally understood. I was having this discussion the other day with somebody, like, this was more on the security side. Like, we send these cybersecurity audits to anybody who wants to be a vendor. And I'm sure every other end user is too. And so these poor software providers have to answer all these ridiculous questions. Like, we think we're the most secure company or something like that.
Thankfully, they're almost always the same.
Yeah.
But
is there just like a thing that says, like, we are compliant with this thing? And like, as an industry, I mean, this is something where I guess Bioforum could be able to help out. Like, as an industry, could we just say, like, yep, this company has passed this test or whatever, or has this licensure, and we don't need to audit them because this is a recognized And it pertains, I guess, both to validation and to cybersecurity.
So there,
Yeah, they have the digital plant maturity model with Biopharma. Maybe they should have a like cloud service provider maturity model or something like that, where you can say, hey, do you meet these guidelines? Sorry, James, go ahead.
I think you're absolutely right. I think, you kind of coming at it from a vendor perspective, for us, we have to, the surveys always have the same sorts of questions on them. The audits generally cover the same sort of topics. And they align pretty well with the quality agreements document that I referenced a few minutes ago. But I think what gets lost is, for example, a SOC 2 requirement is more procedural than it is necessarily high security, and it implies a certain level of security in the way that it's created and it's achieved. But it's not necessarily as comprehensive as like one of the NIST 800-43, for example, standards. So is there an exact fit? I think it's a fairly new space and kind of blending the manufacturing piece together. I know 62443 covers certain parts of it and a risk-based approach, but fundamentally it's a complicated problem to have. For example, our platform PharmaStack, we're complying with the ignition hardening guide from a security perspective. We're also complying with the best practices from Microsoft for Azure and from Amazon for AWS for their well-architected frameworks, which implies a certain level of security, but isn't necessarily asked for per se by an end user. So it is a complicated space for sure. And how do you create that confidence in the end users when it's a space that's also not terribly well understood typically by the people that are buying the services. They're global security maybe, but not usually the ones who are actually shopping for the specific business need, because they're not cloud experts. They're experts in the business that they live in.
Yeah, and same with the QA personnel. They're not the most savvy on cloud technologies either, right? And they're usually the ones, them and regulatory affairs, that go up in front of the regulators. And that's what you hear, as an integrator, when I'm talking to QA and trying to explain why, we're doing this thing versus, we're doing something one way versus another way. You have to explain it to me like I can basically go up in front of a regulator. So I imagine it's difficult for them to, look at the cloud and try to understand it, so that then they can, go back to the regulator and say, hey, we're doing this the right way. Look, we're meeting AWS guide or whatever, right? So James, I'm sure you have to go and explain that to folks too.
Yeah. And I'll just maybe quickly address, there was a question in here about our opinion on standards like IEC 62443, ISO 27001, 27017, and Cloud Security Alliance. When has a vendor done enough? I would love to know the answer to that question. There is, unfortunately, it varies from end user to end user, from security department to security department, and ultimately it comes down to a variety of different dimensions. And so, yeah, you can. It's a fantastic thing to comply with one of the frameworks, to be able to say, yes, I have a level of due diligence, attention, and process behind this thing that I do, and my focus on security. That doesn't necessarily qualify you for a specific thing, and it may even come down to, for example, PharmaStack. One of the primary purposes people use it for is installing ignition. So just because I comply with 62443 or 27001 doesn't mean ignition is secure. So the answer is it depends, and it sucks to give that as an answer, but unfortunately the reality is that it's going to be a case by case basis, I think.
And is that like for the end users? I don't know. Is like if the end users themselves aren't agreed upon any of these standards, which I don't think we are, then I'm sure you put a lot of time and effort and maybe some money into complying with these standards, and then an end user comes to you and says, well, I don't really care, like you still need to do all these other things anyways. So it's like, all right.
Typically the reason vendors go and comply with standards is because they're told it's table stakes for entry.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, in one of my previous employers, we had pitched around the idea of ISO compliance. We had a different quality standard that we had complied with, but we'd never done ISO. There was no reason we couldn't, other than the fact that none of our customers asked for it. And if none of the customers asked for it, it wasn't an industry requirement for us, it wasn't preventing us from doing work in that industry, then there wasn't a good business reason necessarily to go do it.
Yep. And I like this. There's a bullet point here about agile versus waterfall. I think this is something I think a lot about in terms of, like, I think one of the cornerstones of Pharma 4.0 is the ability to remain agile. I mean, I think that the idiom or the saying that my PhD advisor always used to say is like, the more you know you don't know. And I think that's true of data too. It's like the more data you collect, the more you're going to learn and the more data you're going to want. And if you've locked down the system for data collection at the edge and qualified and validated it, and you have to open up a change control and change all IQOQ documents and everything like that, we're never going to succeed. Like, at the end of the day, the customer is waiting. So like, if we can't deliver a product, at speed, then yeah, ultimately for us, it's about the patients.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speed to patient, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll maybe just a quick comment on the shared responsibility model, because this is something that maybe not everyone realizes when you buy something from a cloud provider, is if I'm hosting an application on AWS or Google Cloud or Azure, part of what you get when you have something that we're hosting is that we're taking advantage of, or we're using the services that are being provided by those vendors. And those vendors, Microsofts and the Amazons, they typically have every certification in the book, because they're servicing a wide swath of clients across every industry. And then there's the responsibility of, okay, well, if I'm the vendor delivering to you the service and my service provider goes down, or my service provider has a certain level of reliability, or I'm deploying inside of, potentially, say if I was working for Chris and I deployed into his tenant my application, now there's multiple players, multiple vendors involved, and truly understanding who is in control of what and what parts are managed and compliant to what, I think is it's unfortunately it's a little bit complex, but I think with the vendor, the burden on the vendors to help clarify that for users to be able to understand how all the parts and pieces fit together and what that means in terms of availability and reliability and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I can see that being particularly difficult too, for OT. Like, I can see IT getting on board with that, and especially as it pertains to the cloud, but I can see that hard to break into for shop floor folks.
A great example is when we do the hybrid cloud deployments, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a hybrid cloud deployment, if we use something, I'll just use the Microsoft example, they have a product called Stack Edge, which physically installs on site. It's basically like a little bit of cloud that you control and manage from the cloud, but it operates on-prem. That's delivered hardware as a service from Microsoft. So now there's the Microsoft services, which are part of the responsibility of Microsoft to deliver. There's the hardware itself, which is Microsoft to deliver. And then there's the applications living on top, which, PharmaStack would live on top of that. And then there'd be the vendor applications on top of that, which are, an OEE application or whatever the case may be, a SCADA application or, et cetera. So, there's several players in the involved in this, and it kind of, it's often encapsulated and covered off by the service providers, but it's worth understanding that all these pieces are a part of that puzzle. Cool.
All right, let's hop over to the next topic, GXP payloads in the cloud. What sort of applications lend themselves to deployment up in the cloud? And James, do you want to start jumping in? What are you seeing your customers asking for?
So the one we see the most common is around performance management. So we typically find that that's kind of the lowest hanging fruit for a lot of folks is really asset optimization and monitoring, whether that's OEE or some other SCADA-based or other way that they prefer to manage the effectiveness of the equipment or the systems that they're running. But that's usually the first thing that we find that folks are interested in, is being able to baseline performance and be able to compare assets and compare facilities and that kind of stuff. From there, once the data is available, once there is Once things are in the cloud, then it's immediately, let's get it to the data lake. Let's use it for analytics. Let's build a unified namespace. Let's have a data hub concept. There's all these other things that kind of spawn from that. But usually the business reason we see is it starts with, some desire to have this information available to be able to make decisions on it.
Yeah, and we've seen, the ones, if I think of this bullet list as the automation stack, and the things that are pretty near the top, your ERP systems, your CMS systems, LIMS, like those have been in the cloud for a while. Even if it's not one of the big public cloud providers, it's a server located offsite somewhere. It's just a database, really, and that whatever minimal latency between the site and this database doesn't really matter. I think the bottom two bullet points we're starting to explore a lot more, which is, we're using sort of the lightweight paper on glass providers like Tulip and like Apprentice. So these work instructions, they communicate back and forth with a database in a public cloud somewhere that's Catalent's domain essentially, and so long as they have internet connection, then that we can easily do this. And the benefit there being we can get at the data in real time afterwards. But I've seen, I think it's SCADA applications is pretty cool. I've seen, I said this before, like one of my favorite demos, webinars of all time is the one that Benson, Opta 22 folks gave with HiveMQ. And, there was a public facing SCADA website essentially, and they were turning Benson's stack lights on and off at his desk. So all using MQTT. So like really, really low latency. And so that's a cloud SCADA application so I think that, people see SCADA and think, you'd never be able to do process control from the cloud, but that just sort of proves it. Now, whether or not pharma would venture into that is a whole other can of worms. I think that we would be a little too gun shy about that for a while. But someday, maybe.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, what about, so as a CDMO, your customers accessing your manufacturing data? Is there appetite for Catalent to have a space in the cloud that, customer number one, customer number two can go and see how their, equipment is running?
Yeah. This is a big topic for CDMOs. And I don't know if anybody's quite figured it out yet. I think that, we are part of a bioform operations group work stream called the Digital Integration of Sponsors and Contract Organizations, DISCO, which was an awesome group of people talking about this exact thing. Like how, for the sake of the patients, basically, in order for us to move quickly, like we did during the, response to the COVID vaccine, how do we exchange data and information seamlessly without like me emailing somebody and then, calling a meeting and trying to come, like, how do we just be able to securely exchange data and information when all of our data is probably organized completely differently? Like we can, my argument all the time is like, I'm sure that as a company, you can barely have your data organized across multiple sites. Like I'm sure it's organized completely differently across multiple sites. Now we're talking about as a whole entire industry, how do we get all of our data so that it's exchanged securely and that we understand it all? And so, I think we've, explored a little bit using the data lake for that. There are mechanisms by which we can securely provide access to some of our clients. But there's other mechanisms too. I mean, we've thought of using just regular MQTT, and that works great if somebody has a dedicated line. So one of the problems as a CDMO is like if we manufacture somebody's product and then somebody else's product directly behind it, that data can't go to the same broker. Like it needs to go to a different location. We can't just send them other. So relying purely on MQTT may not be enough in terms of, sort of belt and suspenders approach.
Do you feel that like, the concepts in data ops will help you solve this kind of challenge? Because I know you're a very big proponent of data ops as a concept and a construct. And I know the specific example you gave about a transport mechanism may be aside, but being able to have the ability to better manage and model and transport information in a more controlled way.
I think it's absolutely essential to have that level of data ops on the plant floor. Like if I can grab a tag that tells me like this is the customer, and I can use that to drive which endpoint I publish to, then maybe we do have a hope of just using a technology, which I like the idea of just having a technology act as a solution, not have some specific product like our data lake provider be the solution to this. But then it comes like, if we play this thought game and let's say we use MQTT and like the data is organized the way that I like the data to be organized in some sort of a logical hierarchy, but then the end user, like they don't want the data in that format. So I also kind of like the idea of having some sort of an API layer, like some sort of a RESTful interface that says, if you want LIMS data, this is how you can ask for it, and this is how I'm going to give it a response to you, basically. So like all the different pharma companies and the CDMOs can organize the data however they want, but these are the series of agreed upon questions and answers that basically we can actually have some hope of moving the industry forward in that mechanism to exchange data.
I mean, the concept of APIs for that, it makes perfect sense, and certainly when you think about it in that regard, it's just it seems like we're still very just focused on even getting and modeling data out of the system. Still, we're crawling and we're talking about running, but obviously we want to have a goal.
Yeah, and I think that there's, and ultimately like this is the level of transparency that I think that as a CDMO our sponsors are looking for. Like they want to have us be a trusted partner. They are equally as invested in this, if not more invested in the successful manufacture of this product, basically. And so a lot of times what I see over and over again now, being part of a few different CDMOs, is we keep our sponsors at arm's length in terms of data, and having this level of transparency of being able to exchange data in real time it makes us more the partner of choice, basically. Like we're all in this together. We're all, at the end of the day, usually scientists working to provide this drug. And I mean, coming from academia, the level of, I don't know, there's a certain level of satisfaction that I get with every successful drug we get out the door is it could be some life-saving cure, and that was a level of closeness to the end user that that we didn't have in basic research, basically, even though we were working on cool things.
Awesome.
Cool. Okay, we get on to the next topic, single source of truth. How can we maintain data integrity in a cloud-enabled environment? Chris, your focus is on data and analytics. Did you want to kick this topic off?
Yeah, sure. So, like James already said, I'm obviously a big proponent of data ops. So I feel pretty strongly, in line with, the 4.0 solutions community, basically, that, modeling data at the edge, providing a logical structure for your data, as near to the edge as possible is the best strategy in developing a single source of truth. I mean, one of the issues in making a single source of truth is your IT organization has their idea of a single source of truth, probably generated from the ERP system. And then, your OT team has a different concept, maybe like a machine centric. And how do you get these two teams to work together to build on some master data model?
Yeah, how many systems of record can you have if you want a single source of truth, right? Yeah, it sounds like, the folks up at the top, it's the ERP, and, I'm used to dealing with the folks that are down on the plant floor, or maybe one level up, and it's more MES is the they're the system of record or the historian so yeah, it's
But
you're right. It's not one magical place, I guess.
I think too, though, that distance of data from decision also matters, right? So you have to have the right information and the right people in front of the right people at the right time to be making good choices. And if you look at, I'll say, kind of the first attempts that I've seen for, hey, we're gonna implement AI on the factory floor. It goes one of two ways. It's either give me every single piece of data from all those PLCs, and I'm going to take my deep learning model and I'm going to tell you all the insights that you can't see because of deep learning. What they fail to recognize is there's hundreds and millions of data points that are so uncontextualized that it's a blob of uninterpretable data that requires so much cleansing that you've just wasted time and energy and effort doing that.
Yep.
The other side of the coin is, hey, I'm a provider that's figured out a super nifty way to optimize ammonia compressors. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to install dedicated hardware and some IoT stick-on devices, something else, and I'm going to optimize your ammonia compressors. And that's cool because it helps you with your ammonia compressor, but it doesn't help you with your overall data strategy and tying things together and creating a unified model of information that can be used to help with things like deep learning. You can't do deep learning if you're only focused on one set of data points. So the answer is, as it always seems to be, is somewhere in the middle. And I think modeling and modeling at the edge, I think, is the key to this. Is really having the people that understand the factory floor space the best, laying out the way that the information is being collected, hearing and listening to what the ultimate goals are from kind of the analytics and where the opportunities are in terms of kind of business value to be generated, and then building appropriately towards that. Because it's a huge problem, right? But you gotta eat the elephant one bite at a time.
Yeah, I think this comes up time and time again, even as we do connectivity projects, about the role of the data ops tool. And I think if you just send tags into even if you're using MQTT, if you just send tags into your broker and then they end up in your historian, like, you're no better off than the way we've done it for 20 years, which is just Pi connects to everything and all your data lives in Pi. Because at the end of the day, if you want to do machine learning, then you're back to that same problem of, now your data scientists have to spend weeks, months contextualizing all that data because you didn't go through the legwork of making all the tags the same at the beginning, basically. So the example I show people all the time when we're showing off our data hub, basically, is bioreactors. So I'm an upstream person anyways. So at the Amber systems that you buy from Sartorius call the rate at which the agitator spins spin speed, even though every other system out there calls it, agitation _ PV or something like that. So like, if you didn't have that domain knowledge, you wouldn't be able to do a comparison, some sort of a scalability study across your two things if you didn't know that they're the same thing. I mean, that's a relatively simple example. You can probably infer it if you're a halfway intelligent person, but like, I'm sure there's plenty of other examples out there that they're equivalent tags, but they're just different vendor solutions.
Or one of them's in RPM and one of them's in
exactly
something else, and you get all of that complexity into just how the data gets mapped. That I think people, I think this has been kind of the biggest miss from applying these technologies all the way down to the factory floor, is that there's so much perspective missing, and the people that truly understand it aren't always at the table when things are being decided. Sounds like a Catalent they are. So that's a fortunate thing for you.
Trying.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot, especially in the drug product space, right, where you've got multiple vendors of different OEM equipment, and you're, like you said, everything is named has a different tag name, and how do you create that model where your MES sends down a recipe and it doesn't care which fill finish line it is. It could be the line that has a Wonderware SCADA on it. It could be the line that has a or Rockwell factory talk SCADA on it. So yeah, creating that, or how do you have the orchestration of the data going up and modeling, and then you also have the orchestration of the recipe and batch management coming down and saying, because MES shouldn't have to care which system it's talking to. It just cares about, I need you to make 500,000 vials of product A.
Yeah, and if the goal is autonomous manufacturing, which I think is a long way away for pharma, but ultimately I think that it is more degree of automation, then I think you need that layer of contextualization, like you said, like which line is open right now in order to optimize, like based on past patterns, like, and my forecasted schedule, how can I slot this run in and be able to just kick it off autonomously?
Yeah.
All right. So this is our final topic of the day, cloud architectures. What are some of the best practices for cloud deployment? So James, what do you think some considerations are that folks should take into account when they're considering, deploying their OT payloads in the cloud?
In case any of the audience is wondering, this is all my slide, or most of my slide. So, I think it's the biggest thing I think we've got to think about in the next couple of years is the impact of edge. Edge has become, I think, the most important part of the cloud architecture today, and primarily because we have a level of resilience that I think we need to have, and a level of pre-processing of information that truly makes sense when you're talking about multiple facilities or multiple major data collection areas being fed up to the cloud. That concept of having some capability to organize, model, kind of create the context that makes sense at that level, typically at a plant level, for example, and then also be able to send that data up so it can be contextualized against supply chain data and sales data and other things that are going to be potentially useful for it as well. So I don't think I can understate the value of edge and what that's going to mean. My prediction is, and this is a bit bold, but in 10 to 15 years, edge won't be as important because we'll have gone from 5G cellular networks to 40G cellular networks. We'll probably be on Industry 9.0 by then. Things will change from a technology perspective that will hopefully, or maybe not, but will probably change the way we look at how information, how the cloud, and how all these things fit together. None of that truly matters right now. What really matters right now is that I think edge is tremendously important, and I'll talk about more of the other stuff afterwards. But I'm curious your thoughts on that, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know. My counterpoint, I guess, to edge not phasing out, and I know you're made it a joke, but like, I think that for me, it goes back to like why the edge is important. And that's because that's where the business runs. Like, this is where a lot of times, like, I fail to see if you look at the problem from an IT perspective, which I can make fun of IT now because I'm within the IT organization. So that, like, I think they fail to understand that none of, like, I don't really matter. That was the thing that I love. Like, I'm overhead, and I recognize that I'm 100% overhead. Like, if I got fired tomorrow, the business would still run because, like, that's where it's run, right down at the edge. And like, that's where I think that's where it becomes important to, like, going back to the previous point about contextualizing data at the edge. That's where all your solutions to all your problems probably are too, because like the people at the edge probably know exactly what the solutions need to be, and it's like our job to then empower that voice and that problem solving.
Interesting context.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that, and I think my commentary is really that I think technology will be so fundamentally different 10, 15 years from now that I have no idea what it's going to look like, but it'll probably be different. I do think it's worth pointing out that, like, when you look at some of the benefits that people may not realize, there are some IT automation things that have been kind of around for a while that have some potential big impacts on the way things are done, from a quality control, from a command and control perspective as well. And some of those things are, DevOps is a great example. So, DevOps is, and for folks that maybe aren't as familiar with the term, it's the ability for you to be able to have a continuous development capability and have the ability to have automated ways to change and move systems, or make changes to systems. So if you think about it from a practical SCADA perspective, it means I have a development system, I have a production system, maybe a testing or a staging system in between, and I have controlled and managed processes for developing and building code, promoting, collecting changes, approving those changes, and migrating them and running testing procedures on those, and then moving those tested changes into a production environment. That is unfortunately somewhat difficult to do with a lot of the tools that have historically been used for plant floor systems. Some of the more recent developments with different organizations have made this much easier. So being able to have source code control. Another example is, if you guys are familiar at all with containers. So for example, when we run PharmaStack and we run an instance of Ignition, that's running in a digitally signed container that cannot be changed. So when you validate a Windows system, you go in and you validate all the functions, features, configuration, setup, etc. But that doesn't stop someone from putting a file on there or from making a change to the operating system. It's just not possible to make a change to the operating system in a container. They can make changes to applications and configurations, but the operating system itself is static. There's a variety of different technologies in this space that allow for you to take advantage of. Another good example is orchestration, where you can have essentially an agent that's operating all of your systems for you and fixing common problems that go on automatically, or scaling the system if demand increases. These aren't things that are being widely used yet inside of our world, but in the IT space, this is the common way you're seeing things being run. And this technology is super applicable to what we do. It's a matter of finding the right use cases and applying it to those use cases.
And I think it enables a level of agility that we maybe touched on with the first question about, you got me thinking, and this is an area that I'm not super familiar with, coming from mostly the lab side of things, but do you see a future in which, change management is managed through like Git, where it's like you can just push and pull changes and you can see the impact of the code on the product and all your documentation is right there, and screw the procedures you have internally, because like
so the way PharmaStack is set up today is that if you make a change to your Ignition application, it is captured in Git. When you're ready to move those changes from a development environment to a testing, staging, or however your process is set up, those changes are encapsulated and fully documented, so it shows exactly what was changed, by who, when. It has before and after screenshots, and it has an approval process. So somebody has to actually go in and review that and approve that. That feels a lot like what you would want to submit for a change control.
Right.
So the fact that this can be almost completely automated, and that as tools get better, as more and more vendors start to embrace these technologies and support these technologies, you could actually build out a lot of these processes into more automated DevOps processes, which give you the ability to have multiple people working on things at the same time, to be able to roll back very quickly should there be a change that doesn't make sense, and to have full traceability into anything that happened in an electronic system, so you're not having to dig through filing cabinets.
Which I guess for those end users, for those in quality and CSV departments, I guess the argument would be that this is probably far more robust than any of the paper-based processes that we may be clinging on to, or the sort of old way of doing things.
I think that's the essence of where this push to CSA is coming from, is if you look at most SaaS vendors that are providing you a service, they're doing it this way. If they're any good, they are. And so they already have highly automated, tightly managed processes for change control and for management that exist. They're just not done in the same sort of way that you would typically do, a waterfall project, for example, because doesn't make sense for their business.
All right. So now we'll jump into a Q&A. And before we get to questions, I did skip over it a little earlier, but this session is being recorded, and we will be sending that recording out to you folks in the ether who are watching us. So apologize for skipping that over. So let's jump into the first question here. Do you have any suggestions on getting my IT team to support putting OT stuff in the cloud? That's pretty. I don't know, Chris, James. I don't know which one of you guys want to jump on that
there's
one.
pushback from IT because, well, okay, so no, I guess I'm not surprised. So like the biggest concern I think we had was security, like cybersecurity, like this concept. And I have sort of a ridiculous opinion on this, but because what I usually go back to is like, think of the data that we're thinking of publishing into the cloud. Like it's manufacturing data. Like if somebody by some sheer luck, like first of all, are we saying that our systems are more secure than the way that AWS or Azure manages their cybersecurity? Because that's an absurd statement anyways. And then like, second of all, like let's say somebody were to get in the middle and intercept all the data. Congratulations. Like you just got a time series string of temperatures and stir rates and everything like that. Cause you know, the real IP here, and this is uniquely as a CDMO is the customer's molecule. And very often, like we don't even know necessarily how to make that molecule. We know how to manufacture it, but we don't know how to reverse engineer it. So like for us being a manufacturer, like it's just meaningless data basically. Without you have to have a huge amount of industry knowledge in order to even be able to look at the data and know what you're looking at.
And just based on my experience, what I've found is the IT departments are typically, they already have a mature cloud strategy. They typically have already decided on a data lake. They typically have decided on some sort of a cloud strategy, whether that be private or public cloud. And they have a set of security standards and best practices. And usually the fear is coming from the OT folks. And so often, bluntly, the role we play is helping to kind of referee that conversation to go, no, this is totally possible. This is totally fine. You know, what they're asking for is this, and it means this. And it's like a translation service between the groups. And, you know, the hard part is that, you know, what we're finding is that the IT folks typically have a burden on them that's heavy. And so what we see more often than not is that they're concerned that if all of a sudden OT workloads come in, that it's going to be a resource challenge for them, and that they're already strapped dealing with conversions and management of assets that they have. And that's where SaaS vendors can be of tremendous use, because SaaS vendors aren't typically a heavy burden on them. SaaS vendors are offering them a managed service that they pay for, and as long as it's secure and connected and they can basically make sure things are good, it's not a huge requirement for additional staff. I would say too that there's a misconception that all cloud is public. Most of our enterprise customers use, and I'll just use again Azure as an example, they use things like express routes to route all of the traffic for these systems, even though we're using public cloud, even though it's technically in a publicly available cloud data center. None of the traffic is going across the public internet because of the routing technologies that they're using. Yep. So it's, from a vulnerability perspective, I mean, obviously anything that leaves a building is vulnerable, but I would argue that leaving something in a building and never updating it is worse.
Yeah. Or leaving it in paper is far worse. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, another question. This is a long one. If edge-driven architectures for unified namespace were to be adopted by the pharma industry at large, relying on MQTT seems to be the underlying transport protocol used by most in other industries. To accomplish this in a regulated industry, I see challenges with this that result in elevated validation efforts. This, coupled with the quality of service that would be required for MQTT, seem to deter from this, and staying with traditional OPC UA seems more trivial. How important is the edge-driven aspect in life sciences?
Yeah, I feel like there seems to be a couple of questions in here. I mean, the last one I think we've touched on in terms of edge-driven. Like, I think that's absolutely critical in terms of building your single source of truth. I think the transport mechanism, like, if you were to that level of detail, this is a discussion I've had before with engineers. Like, engineers worry about that level of detail. Quality and CSV don't have any clue what the hell you're talking about. Like whether you say we're going to use MQTT to transport our data or we're going to use OPC UA, it doesn't really matter, I don't think.
I think what he's referring to is there's quality of service levels you can enable and disable on MQTT, which imply additional overhead in the transport. But MQTT is such a low bandwidth protocol that even with QoS, I'm not sure it's going to be any worse than what you would have with a UA. And I mean, UA has a pub sub coming too, so maybe that will eventually become the technology of choice. The nice part about these kind of hub and spoke sort of architectures is that, you know, all the parts of it are replaceable, and there are different technologies from different vendors, even with the same protocol, that have different levels of reliability and resiliency. So, you know, part of it, I think, comes down to technology choice and even down to which broker you choose, because different brokers have different capabilities for caching and for the way they handle sessions, but also, you know, choosing what's best at the time, you know, because you can't truly predict the future, but what fits the business need the best. I don't know if that answered the question.
I think so. All right, that's it for the questions. So thanks, thank you everybody for attending. Thanks James and Chris for you know, the great discussion today. And just another reminder to all the registered attendees, you will be sent a recording of the discussion. And if you have any further questions for any of us, you can send them to info@grantek.com. And we'll do our best to get those answered for you. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Brian, for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon.